my gosh, Nathan, look at that beard. Haven't seen you in a while, buddy. Pretty good, pretty good. Can't complain. I could, but I'd be lying to you. Yeah, exactly.
It's great. It's really interesting to see the kind of graphics that you do because the others are here for flyering petitions and this guy he doesn't even think of signing petitions. And he's like, this is not the conversation I wanted to be having. But then you also encounter people who saying in front of the medical and I'm shouting like, that was particularly hey, Gary, you and share the
Drew will be the moderator. Oh, Devin's here.
Just sit here?
I guess so.
All
I don't
right.
bite usually.
Yeah. Well, don't start today.
Yeah. Tell you what, I'm going to start acting weird. Saturday would be the day to do it. So
Yeah, that's true. Get it all over with.
why not?
I was just in this room.
I know. I did 3 years of SDP meetings in this room.
Really?
Yeah. Where we started the chapter here at DC in this room.
Really? 3 years ago?
5.
5
This
years
is
ago.
November. Yeah, 2008 we started. November of 2008.
Alright, welcome to lobbying, guys. We're going to talk about how you can affect change through lobbying. So this is going to kind of be an interactive discussion. I'm going to have some prompts for these guys to talk about. By the way, our panel is made up of Devin Tackles, Outreach Director at SCP, George Forsyth, Speaker at Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And what was your former title as a law enforcement officer?
Detective.
Detective.
Yep.
And Jeremy, chapter leader and founder at the University of North Georgia. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many people have lobbied before at any level? Nice. How many people do not know what lobbying is, or somewhat intimidated by the term? Good. All right. We're ahead of the game here. Okay. Perfect. So how do you guys want to get started here? Do you want to talk about maybe the basics of what it actually means to go lobby and how you might go about setting up those meetings and things like that? Just kind of real basic stuff, or do you want to jump into something more advanced about how do we talk to legislators about naloxone or things like that? What do you guys think?
I think the basics would be good because I'm sure some people are kind of wondering about that.
Okay. Cool. You want to get started?
Okay. Well, so basically in Georgia, lobbying is really, really easy. I was trained by the ACLU in probably a 30-minute session. It's really simple. One of the easiest ways is to go directly during a session meeting and pull one of the legislators out of the session and talk to them for 2 or 3 minutes. They will always come out. Basically, you write just a little informal letter, and then a page will go get them, and then you have 2 to 3 minutes, a handshake, and then your talking points. The best way to go about it, though, is to schedule meetings with your actual representatives. So look up their information on the internet. Every state has a .gov legislator where you can find their phone number, their address, their email. So go through their legal aids, go through them, and schedule an appointment. Would you like to add to that?
I could briefly. I'm a little more new to the lobbying end. I've done some the testifying end is what I've done more. I haven't done a whole lot of lobbying, but what he said was right, and it kind of reminds me that there's non-traditional ways too. And when I think back, most of my career was in narcotics. That's what I did, undercover work, almost my entire career, 26 years. And a lot of times you can't get to the man. It's the way it is, but you can get to the man next to the man. Lobbying's not a whole lot different. You just have to talk. Sometimes you just have to find that right person who can get you to that right person. There may be other things that they're interested in, other places they go. Without saying any names, even just a cigar shop near I am. I've had several talks with one of our legislators. I know he goes there every Wednesday night for cigars, and I like cigars. We sit and talk many times. I haven't changed his mind one iota, but we're talking. He's listening.
Let's get into the testifying bit, because that is lobbying. It's it's telling stories and telling compelling stories for the most part. So how have you found what kind of ways do you testify? Like, have you found to be effective? Do you talk about, like, as a member of law enforcement, this is what I dealt with, and this is why this law doesn't make sense? Or is it more like, I knew someone who this affected, and therefore we should have this kind of law?
I've done a little both. I'm in school to be a drug counselor. I work with a lot of people in recovery right now. But but what they want to listen to is the law enforcement stuff. If for example, I was a plumber or a painter, they wouldn't care about anything I was saying to them. So from the law enforcement stuff, I have to use what they want to hear. So I guess mostly from when I've testified, it's been from the law enforcement stuff. Yeah, some stories, some of the ridiculous things that I've seen, some of the ridiculous stuff with law-wise that I've seen, some of that kind of information I've shared with them.
And Devin, real quick, so for the people here who are going to be testifying or lobbying, who don't have necessarily a law enforcement background, what kind of stories or facts are effective to bring to the table in this kind of situation?
I think it's important to highlight personal experience. When you're talking from a personal perspective, you tend to be more passionate. You're going to be talking from the heart. And it's important to remember when you're meeting with your House representative, your senator, your state assembly person, whatever it might be, in whatever medium. If you're testifying in front of them in a committee, like Mr. Forsyth was saying, or if you're going to lobby with them in person in their office, or also if you're just writing them a letter or sending them an email, those are all forms of lobbying. So keep that in mind. Lobbying doesn't have to be done at the State House. If you are farther away from the State House, you can do it in other ways. But generally going from a personal perspective, if you think about it pretty hard, I'm sure if you haven't been personally affected by the drug war, you know someone who has. Maybe a friend or family member had a drug overdose. Maybe someone that went to jail for drug possession. Whatever it might be. Maybe someone was a parent and lost a child. Talk from the heart. Tell them your story. No one's story is the same, and everyone's is special. And when you're talking from the heart, you tend to come across more effectively, and people are going to maybe listen to you than if you stayed up late trying to prepare this acting spiel of sorts. Just talk from what you know. That's what they're looking to hear. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to get your point across clearly and then effectively.
And you are the experts on your own experiences. Jared?
Yeah, I was also going to touch on testifying before committee hearings and stuff like that. A lot of times it is possible when they are. Generally, they'll have a day where they do testimonies, and then they'll have the vote in the committee hearing. On the days that they do the testimonies and the testifying, it is possible for students, for anybody, it's open to the public. You just put your name on a list, and you get, I think, 2 minutes in Georgia anyways. So it is possible to get out there, and if you know statistics, like in Georgia, we had... one of our things was overdose prevention and Good Samaritan. In 2010, we had 152 deaths in 152 counties. We had almost 700 overdose deaths that year, and 86% of them were attributed to prescription drugs and opiates alone. So you've got a couple of seconds to basically scare the shit out of them. They do it to us. You know what I'm saying? And we kind of played off that same fear and the same tactics that they've been using on us for years, and tried to pull on their heart as well with the personal stories. We were super effective in Georgia with Good Samaritan because we were able to organize a grassroots effort of parents and students in a coalition amongst with other activist groups who had all had experiences with deaths. It's hard to tell a 40-year-old mother that No. When her son died 2 years ago from a heroin overdose, it's hard to tell her that I'm not going to give you 2 seconds of your time, and it's hard for them to attack somebody like that. Just as well, you'll see with the medical in a lot of the southern states, you have the children with Darvet. So those images are extremely powerful. The deaths, the severe illnesses that can be helped by marijuana, personal stories are what sells and seals the deal. So.
Excellent point. I want to turn it back to the audience for a little bit. Those of you who have had experience lobbying, can we have an example of some experience that you found was successful or effective, and maybe an experience that you thought was not effective, and maybe we could troubleshoot it a little bit? So I know a lot of you said you were separate.
I'm trying to be very concise in what you're saying, and I'm short amount of time you have to speak to the representative. How you don't put a bunch of stuff you don't need to tell them, Get straight to the point as fast as you can.
So what specifically did you guys lobby for in Georgia?
The medical marijuana bill, House Bill 885.
And how did that process go?
They just came out and talked to each of your representatives, change your district.
What kind of, how did you try to convince them? Was it stories, facts, both?
Yeah, and more or less, we talked about the benefits of it, and then one of the senators was like, "Oh, okay, this could." I believe it was his sister. Yeah, his sister had stage 4 cancer or whatever. She's like, "You hypothetically benefit from this bill, So it's kind of just attached with his story, because
I'd also like to add, it's really important. The majority of us are not doctors in this room, so when you are speaking about medical and aspects like that, just remember that you are not a medical professional as well. I mean, you can touch on facts and those types of things, but you're not a doctor. So,
Nico.
I think it's important when you develop lobbying is knowing who you're talking to.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's important to identify an aspect of the person or house delegate or senator or whatever. Things like religion, background, what activity for politicians. Some people are medical experts who will be sensible to making candidates, for instance. You have a former law enforcement as a senator, you can talk about the effects of regulation in terms of reducing crime. So knowing who you're talking to is a good way to identify what points you can use.
It's perfect. Do your homework on your legislators too. Find out what schools they went to, what towns they grew up in, and those types of things. If you can bring up that so and so comes from the hog capital of Georgia, and bring it up in some chit chat, you're getting brownie points. You're connecting with these people. They're individuals. They're people. They go out and drink and have a good time too, and they make mistakes as well. So,
Like what Jeremy said about making sure, for example, not being a doctor. And when I went to testify, now it's the internet age. Every legislator had a laptop open like that. And you can see them when somebody was saying something, especially a statistic or quoting a statistic, they were right on it. And they got a couple of people, there was a couple of people testified, they zung them. They didn't have any comeback. They were like, well, I'm just looking at this right here. It says this. And plus I'm sure they're emailing each other back and forth, chatting back and forth while they're doing it. But so if you're gonna talk any kind of stats nowadays, you better have those numbers right. Where'd you get them and everything else.
I could just building off of what Nico said. There's 5 things that I like to try and keep in mind when I'm lobbying. That's to be prepared. Knowing who you're talking to, know their voting history. Have they voted on a bill like this before? Have they sponsored a bill like this? Are they a champion? Are they an ally? Are they a complete combatant? Be professional. You want to look the part and play the part. So you should be prepared mentally, but also dress the part. When you're going to lobby, you should be wearing a suit and jacket, or at least dress up nicely. It's something that you would wear to a business interview, perhaps. They're going to be much more likely to take you seriously if you're playing the part. Who here has heard of Saul Alinsky? Anyone? He wrote a very famous book called Rules for Radicals, and in that book, there's one thing he says about how you start a revolution, and it's not by going out there in the streets and throwing up pitchforks and signs. He has a famous quote. It's cut your hair, put on a suit, and go infiltrate the system from within. And that's exactly what you're doing with lobbying. You're showing up, you're dressing the part, and then you're being courteous, you're being kind. You're not going in there and yelling at your representative or your congressperson. You're being courteous. You're assuming generally that they already have a little bit of a background on this. So you don't want to come off like you're this super intelligent, I've got all the answers, they're just in this book here of stats or whatever. You want to come in and be curious, start a conversation. You want to be specific about what you're there for too. That's the third thing. Make sure that you are on point with your talking points that you've prepared, that you're knowing exactly what the ask is. It's very important. What's your ask? Do you want them to co-sponsor a bill? Do you want them to introduce legislation? Do you want them to become your champion because you think that they might be interested in that? Whatever it is, you have to be specific. And then you want to make sure you follow up. After you leave, you want to make sure that you send them an email, shoot them a message, give them a call, write them a handwritten letter. They love that. Send them a thank you card. Whatever it is, those things. Be prepared, be professional, be courteous, be specific, and follow up.
Really good.
Something that you should not do is attack the person who you're trying to convince. Because if you, maybe they previously voted against measures that you're trying to promote, and if you go in there and say, well, you did this before, and you did this, and you're a hypocrite because you smoke pot too, like you're not going to get them on your side.
Or attack the people that are on the other side, because there's a bunch of them testifying too. When I went there, it was intimidating as hell to be I'm a retired state trooper, like I said, and they bring in this contingent of Class A dressed police officers. Now I know 25% of them, were hugging up on me in the hall and we're talking. And most of them are like, I'm like, what are you doing here? Well, I'm ordered to be here. They tell us to dress in Class A and come here. So it looks like there's this whole mob of them coming here. Half of them, it's just an easy assignment to get them off the street, and they get to stand around the courthouse for 4 hours and claim 8. So don't attack them either. Once they're done, because they went first, and I did it a little bit, when I shouldn't have, because I know some of the points they were making, being from that background, I know were completely false. I knew they don't even agree with what they're saying, and I did it a little bit, and I learned my lesson. I don't think I'm going to do that next time.
I've lobbied a few times, maybe once or twice federally, and a few times in West Virginia at the state legislature. And one question I was asked that I was not prepared to answer, surprisingly, was, why do you care about this? Why are you in my office lobbying for this issue? And I didn't have anything prepared. I gave him a really bad answer. But that's something to think about. Like, why are you passionate about this? You could mention, hopefully you have somebody who's affected by this. Like if you're lobbying for medical marijuana, maybe you have a grandparent who has terrible arthritis, but this helps them, not be having to use opiates or something like that. I ended up giving, it was a terrible answer, but yeah, that's how they can connect to you. So be prepared for that.
I think just building off of that, one thing that could be helpful if you're planning a lobby day with your chapter, maybe the meeting before you go to lobby, get together and practice. Practice makes perfect, and if you can get together as a group and you know what you're going to be lobbying for, maybe it's a bill, maybe it's just a general medical marijuana or something like that. Trying to get the issue to come forward. Rehearse with each other. Figure out what might be some potential questions, like you were saying. They might ask you, "Why do you care about this? Why should I care about this?" Is another reason. Connecting it to their constituents, making them realize this is something that has political capital for them, because that's what it's all about. Is making sure that they keep that. So rehearse that with each other. Go back and forth. Have a one-on-one. One person is the lobbyist. The other person is the representative. And role play. You're going to get in there and you're going to feel a little nervous when you're in that room. I know I have. Even when you're in a big group. One time, the VCU chapter, we all went. I think there was 8 of us. We went to go see Representative Bobby Scott from Richmond. And even with that many people in the room, you get a little nervous. You're talking to a United States congressperson. So if you role play, you're going to be much more likely to be less nervous, be on point, know exactly where you're going, and not get off track and derail. That's probably one of the worst things you can do is get off track and because you're nervous or whatever the reason may be, and end up going on this tangent that doesn't really connect to the issue, makes you seem like a crazy non-strategic vocal activist, these type of things. Actually, here in Virginia, at the state assembly here, we came in with a huge lobbying group from Virginia Normal one time. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition was there with us. It was a huge, activist lobby day. I think it's usually the first week of session. And we got into one of the representatives who was our assembly members that was on the House Judiciary Committee, which was looking at the potential decriminalization of marijuana bill in Virginia. So it's very important that we got in this office and talked to him because he was leading the committee. He has the ability to steer it towards pass or fail. And we got in there with one of their constituents and a group of 4 of us, and we'd gone over all of our talking points, we practiced, we rehearsed. But once we got in there, the 2 constituents got completely off track. And we only had 10 minutes with this assembly member, so we really had to be on point. And we lost it and got completely off track. And all of a sudden we got at the end of it, and we had not really discussed any of the things we wanted to discuss with them. And we all kind of came off as disorganized and maybe a little crazy while we were at it. So because of the way that conversation went. So you want to make sure that you're staying on track and that you're don't be afraid to be brief or short. You don't have to explain the entire story behind an idea. Just be clear. And as Jeremy's saying, and also Mr. Forsyth here, working on that, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a lawyer. Most oftentimes your elected officials are on the average subject. They're laymen, right? They may have a few very expertise areas where they come from being maybe they were a lawyer or a judge or something like that. But on other average issues, they're going to have a regular understanding of it. So you don't have to come in there and be a professional. You just have to talk to them like a normal person.
It's interesting how you commented on now in today's situations you have things like laptops constantly streaming this. It's almost like this no knowledge or something. How does that play into all this?
I mean, when I saw it, I was surprised. I mean, they're not the most, when you're in one of those committee type of hearings, in my opinion, they're not the most polite anyways. They don't make any bones about they're not really even listening. If they've already disagreed with you, a lot of them, they're not the most polite. And they're talking to each other and writing stuff and typing on their, looking down and just listening to people. But there was a woman from the ACLU. Her last name was Love. Sarah Love. And she had commented something from the Christian Science Monitor, and she's on her game. It sounds like you know her, so she's already on her game. So one of the guys, while she said that, he looked it up. He looked at a different part of the article, and he confronted her on it. Luckily, because she knew it backwards and forwards, she said, no, you need to scroll down a little further, and you'll see the chapter that I'm talking about. But that's just goes to show you. She mentioned that article. He was right away, look, okay, let me see if she's just making this up. And same thing with any kind of stats or numbers on it. And then they would just throw stuff out there, too. You don't really have a chance to counter it when I can go online and pretty much you can give me any point you want to make, and I can go on the internet and prove it. Anything ridiculous you want to say, I can go on the internet and find some kind of research saying, yeah, that's true. And that's what these guys would throw these questions out. Well, you're sitting there at a table like this. I don't know what the Wisconsin Board of Education found in 1989, this or that they're coming up with. But if they're already against it and they're in that mood, they're going to throw things like that at you.
So what we like to recommend, speaking of stats and facts versus personal stories, what we like to recommend is that your arsenal is really the personal stories, and that you bring facts to leave with them. You have a packet of statistics to leave with them, but what you lead off with and what you talk about in person is a personal story. Because Mr. Forsyth, check.
George, yeah, please call me George. I keep trying to interrupt you to say call me George.
So what George was talking about here is
I've been called a lot worse.
You can prove anything, any fact on the internet. And also the thing with facts and statistics is they've always been on our side. Drug war doesn't make sense on paper, but
deal with the raw data.
Yeah, it's hard to humanize a number, but it's really easy to humanize a person who's been affected by the drug war. If you show the picture of someone who died of an overdose because their friends didn't feel safe calling 911, that drives the point home. If you show a picture of somebody who's been in a car accident and the only thing that works for them is medical marijuana because they have so many issues and the drugs that they're prescribed just make them a zombie, that drives the point home. You need to show, we need to show that the people that the drug war is affecting are not some, people with no names off in some far off land. It's people in your own constituency. It's people that we all know. It's people that look like you. That's what really drives the point home. And then leave the facts for them to check out on their own time.
I forgot what I was going to say. But if you don't know something, I don't know if anybody's touched on this yet. If you don't have an answer, do not make up one. because you will hurt your cause. If you come off with some statistic that might sound right, and then 2 days later in the lobby, you get a cold shoulder from a representative because you told a lie. I mean, that's expected. And then he goes and tells his friends that your organization is not reputable. So do not be afraid to say, I don't know, I will get back to you. That's a perfect way to build up a rapport with a legislator. Let me get your email. I'll email you tomorrow. I got 24 hours to get these statistics to you, and I'll call you and follow up with them. Be on point and be professional. This is like it's like you're selling a car or selling a product. You're selling an idea. You want to look the part and act the part, and you can't anything that they don't want to buy it from you. You know what I'm saying? They want to go somewhere that's cheaper or has a better or whatever. But you have to keep maintaining that, I guess, relationship and driving it home with them. But like I said, don't make up facts.
Great point. Speaking of the relationship, do you guys want to talk about how you maintain that relationship, how you follow up, and all that kind of stuff? We could just go like one down the road.
Sure. So, for example, when we first got started here at VCU, we started lobbying with Bobby Scott, who was actually not only friendly to drug policy reform, also a champion in some cases, especially with some of the crack cocaine sending disparity legislation of 2010. So he was already a champion to our issue in a lot of ways. So we didn't have to go a lot about convincing him that drug policy reform is something he should care about. He already did. It was a matter of getting him on board with other elements that he didn't know about or that kind of a thing. And when we first started, it was just groups of us going in. We went in, I think at least 3 times while I was president to meet with him in person. And by the end of it, he remembered us. The second time he remembered us, we would always follow up with an email after we met with him, leave our fact sheet, stats, whatever. And then you send him a personal email when you get home. And then anytime we would have legislation that was potentially good or bad, we would write him handwritten letters sometimes, or if not, an email. And by the end of it, I believe Rose, who is floating around here somewhere, she actually got an email or maybe a written letter from him asking for her opinion on an issue related to drug policy, because she had been in there and contacted him so many times and built up this rapport. So we went from not really knowing them, him not knowing who we were, to him actually reaching out to us for assistance on what we thought about a perspective on drug policy. So it's all about being consistent. How many people go into a legislator's office and meet with them once, yell at them angrily, and then they never come back because they're never going to come on my side, kind of thing. You want to make sure it's consistent. You want to start small and build up. If you want to send an email or a handwritten letter or maybe make a phone call until you build up that rapport, you get to meet them in person, then follow up and come back another time for another issue maybe, and be consistent. Be courteous, be kind to them. And it's also important, this is maybe a quick segue here, when you go in to meet with your elected officials, you should know where they are and where you want to put them. So if they're an adversary, and they're maybe writing legislation against drug policy reform, right? They're doing things like the Higher Education Act, aid elimination penalty, things that are actively going against common sense and drug policy. You're probably not going to walk in there and have a 5-minute conversation with them and convince them that they should be championing marijuana legislation, right? Marijuana legalization or something like that. They're not going to come that far across the spectrum in one 5-minute sitting. What we might be able to do is get them in the middle so at least they're not actively pursuing bad policies, that kind of thing. Make sure you're trying to figure out where you want to put them by the end of the meeting. Convince them otherwise. And then just make sure you're following up. The best thing is, like Drew was saying, leave stats so that they can check it out. Maybe they can do some research. Maybe give them some resources where they can look for other factual information. Maybe they haven't heard of things like Arrowhead, or they don't know about the Drug Policy Alliance website or the SSDP website, or some of the action centers that we have. And make sure that if you can, always write a handwritten letter or a thank you letter. That's a really great way to get to them, because many people don't write them. Like, how many people in here have written a handwritten letter in the last month? Okay, yeah, less than 5. So getting a handwritten letter in the mail means a lot, especially when you're an elected representative who is used to just getting angry emails.
And George, how do you maintain these relationships?
Well, again, I'm new at that, and the organization Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP, we followed up as an organization. I didn't personally follow up. Hearing what I'm hearing now, that's a good idea, and it's still pretty fresh. There's one of them and his name is escaping me now. He's retired law enforcement or ex-law enforcement from somewhere. I don't know where from. He's totally against the legalizing marijuana part. And he said some stuff in the paper that and he was the one that I really was having trouble not just going at, because okay, we know better. You know, I don't know. But I think hearing what you're saying, the advice I'm getting here, and I'm here learning too. You know, I think I'm going to follow up on that.
Maintaining relationships. I think it's both. I think the first part is how did you come about in establishing the relationship. So let's see. There's two different ways that I would recommend about going about it. First is yourself and building up the rapport with yourself and getting the meetings, the Facebook or not the FaceTimes, the emails and all those types of things, and then continue to following up with it. Granted, if you have a bill that you're working on and it's supported by your legislator, keep up with the updates and call your senator and tell them how it's going and those types of things. So once you've built up your personal relationship, just maintain it. Like for instance in Georgia, we've got Good Samaritan and we've got naloxone. That passed this year. I'm actually going to ask my friend Tanner. We've got 15 bills I was going to give to the chapter leaders. Maybe you guys can incorporate these 9 pages into some of the work that you've been doing in your states. To get back with the rapport, let's see. I was really successful because of family connections. A lot of the people that my parents were involved in with city politics in suburban Atlanta are now EEOC chairmen or Human Health Service women chairmen or lieutenant governors and those types of things. We did a lot of political fundraising. I actually campaigned for several of these people at the age of 5 as a young Republican. So it calls in political favors. If your family can get you a meeting with one of these people, or you have a neighbor whose friend is a judge who can get you, build up that rapport, work that way. Because if you can build a personal connection with these legislators, that puts a first name to you. You're so-and-so's son, or you're so-and-so's friend. Those powerful people. These are all powerful people that congregate with each other. They really don't go to the slums. They don't go to the projects. They are not... they're an affluent community. So if you can have an affluent individual introduce you to them and who is sympathetic, that's the best way. As far as maintaining the rapport, I send these people emails about once a month. This is what we did at our school. This is what we're doing in Athens. This is what's going on with here. I'm showing them the progress because they didn't give us any money. We have to raise naloxone funds ourselves. We have to do the benefit concerts, and we have to do the dinners and those types of things at the Four Seasons to get the money to get to the police and then go about that way. We're also working with Robert Childs and obtaining funds through, I believe, Soros. So rapport is extremely important. If they like you and they've already, I was introduced by the EEOC chairman to every powerful legislator in Georgia. They call me. They write me now. But I also didn't go in there and I didn't say Students for Sensible Drug Policy because it has drug in there. And this is the South. This is Georgia. Although I did slip in paperwork that said SSDP and some of the reports that I wrote for them and testified in, and actually an SSD report was used in a hearing in the Judiciary Committee, had Students for Sensible Drug Policy in it. Be careful because it's about image. Everything you do, they're trying to scrutinize you in every single way possible. You're this or that, you're a pothead, you're a stoner, you're poor, you're black. You really want to look the part. You want to look like you're their kids. And as being college students from major universities, you have access to resources that they can only dream about. You can go out and speak good about this legislator and speak bad about that legislator. You can connect with different universities in your state and then, say who's voting on this and that. But rapport building, I digress. It's extremely important. Sorry.
Yes.
So I might have missed something, but I heard you mention several ways to establish a relationship.
Yes, ma'am.
One of them was, you had a lot of connections of family and friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also had, someone in the legislature who agreed with what you guys were.
Yes, we had for Good Sam, because we did Good Sam and naloxone, and then we had the medical bill as well that our organization worked on. So with Good Sam, we had a bill. We knew about the bill beforehand because we were working with the people in the inner circle. We had people in the legislature, and we had powerful legislators who introduced it. Human Health Service chairwoman. If you want anything to come through that committee, you got to get it through her. So, she carries a lot of pull. Her legal aid, one of my friends, wrote the bill, and then, it's been digested, and this is what we have. But yeah, what was your question? I'm sorry.
So I was just kind of wondering what other ways, or maybe what would you suggest if I don't
have
one,
the
have a connection, or two, have anyone that agrees or
Okay.
wants to support us?
First, I want you to go in there and be objective and not antagonistic in any way, because that's extremely important. For you to find people who are wanting to work with you, you're going to have to be that way. And they're going to have to say, I want to do this, and then you're going to have to come up away with how to help it. With ours, our selling point was, well, we've got 4 different chapters at our school. We can reach every major university in North Georgia in one email, and I can have this law printed out and in every single dorm. So how do you build up the rapport? You need to do it in person. You need to meet them. You need to talk to them, and you need to schedule appointments. If you can get through an email, legal aids, if you're calling, you're more than likely going to get a legal aid. When you go to the Capitol and talk to them, hey, I've got 2-3 minutes, but Mr. So-and-so, Senator, Madam, whoever, let's get a meeting next week when this bill's before the committee hearing, and let's talk about it and see how my friends are, and maybe you can help me, and I can help you in some ways. So it's all about what you do. Yes, does that answer?
We're
Sorry.
going to stay on this point for a second.
Okay.
Devin and then
Yeah.
Sure. So I would just kind of start the conversation, answer your question by saying that you already have a relationship with these people. Just a quick show of hands. Who here is over the age of 18? Okay, so pretty much everyone. Okay. Who here voted in the last election, local, state, anything? Okay, so almost everyone, most people. That means you already have a relationship with these people. You're their constituent. You're a voting constituent, which is the most important thing. If you want lawmakers to take you seriously, they care about one thing most, that you are voting for them, because they need to keep their office going. An incumbent politician wants to stay in power for the most part. Now, as a constituent, you have that ability to go and meet with them anytime you want. They are required to do that. That's part of the way this works. So if you're going in there, even if you've never sent them a letter, they have no idea who you are. You're just Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo, whatever it might be. You're walking in there. You're making an appointment, whether you're doing that over the phone or you're going in there and then coming back for another appointment later. However you go about doing it, you can start that. Every relationship has to start somewhere, and it's definitely going to start off faster if you're a voting constituent, or if you're maybe, let's say, the chairperson of the committee that you're trying to influence to get that legislation passed. Maybe you're not in their voting. What's what I'm looking for? Voting
District.
District. Thank you. Voting district is Saturday, but you're not in their district. But maybe one of your friends is. Use that to get in with them. Bring your friend with you. Work together on that, tag team it. You don't have to be playing golf with them or have the judge down the street to know that you can get in there and talk to them and start the relationship. When we got involved with Bobby Scott, we had no idea who he was, and he didn't have any idea who we were. So we just started that, and after years of doing it, he eventually was reaching out to the VCU SSDP chapter for help. So anyone can do it.
And I don't want you to feel at all disadvantaged if you don't have like powerful family, or like most of us don't, and it doesn't. I mean, I like to say it doesn't matter, but I don't mean to feel at all disadvantaged because of that. And it's not always a bad thing if you can't get in touch with the legislator themselves. A lot of times you will find yourselves getting scheduled meetings with their legislative aides, and that's a good thing because the legislative aides are much closer in age to us. They are much more likely to agree with us, and they're going to be your guy or girl on the inside, and they're going to be like, here's how you get what you need to do done. So that's how you find friends on the inside, and that's the fastest way, is going through the legislative aides. And they're the ones who are the kind of the bugs in the ears of the legislators. So yeah, does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. Nico?
Well, I just wanted to I was going to mention what you said. Sometimes you might meet staffers, not the actual congressmen, and they are more open to youth because they're younger. And some people would say that it's easier to stick with them to get things done because, well, this is my new office, but the staffers usually stay around and change offices, so it's always a good connection. And another point I wanted to touch is that, right now we have a lot of issues happening, like legalization in 2 states, 1 country. So a lot of politicians, because they're interested to know what's the issue about. So you can come to their office with the interest to educate them and not precisely like or something, like be like, hey, this is what's happening in the country. I have to be part of this organization. We just want to talk about what's happening. And very sure, like an educational, perspective, not like pushing something. Might also be good to establish relationships.
And we have a brief second here. I want to throw out just a pro tip here. One of the things that I think we could encompass or should bring into all of our areas of activism is creativity. And I think lobbying is definitely a place where you can be creative. Whereas a lot of people who are lobbying are, just what we said, straight from the book, those 5 points I was talking about earlier, you come in dressed up and everything. Don't be afraid to step out of the box a little bit, to the extent that, like, for example, some successful methods I've seen are maybe HB 41 is the bill you're lobbying for, and you bring in a cake that says, please vote yes on HB 41. You put that in the office. They're going to see that, like, what the hell is HB 41? Oh, that's a really important bill on this. Maybe they'll think twice about it. I mean, it's not necessarily bribing, but it's like it's getting that information in front of them. However, you're being creative about it. It's like putting up a billboard, along their route to work every day, kind of thing. That's things that a lot of people do. Things like that. Just keep in mind, be creative when you're doing these things. If you want to bring in a gift for your senator or congressperson, like a cake, that's totally acceptable. And I think, or maybe a big card to thank you from a picture of your chapter. We appreciate you taking our concerns seriously. Things like that will really go a long way in establishing that rapport and building that connection and making them, get that information in front of their eyes.
Are there any, there's a ton of overlap between lobbying campus officials as with state level officials. Is there anything that's different with that? My chapter is working on changing a campus law right now, and it's a very, very slow machine. And I'm sort of looking for pointers on how that might be a little different.
I think one key difference is you don't vote for your president or your dean, and they're up every 2 or 6 years for re-election. They're also got a board that is generally conservative in nature at most universities. But in general, it's the same principle. It's a matter of sitting in and getting a meeting with your dean or your dean of students, or getting all those people together and discussing what should be done. We're in the process of doing that at our chapter, but it's the same thing. Have your talking points, be professional, have your crew with you, have everybody fill in, and have one person do statistics and one person be the salesman, and then this person come in and do something. Plan it out and be professional. It really, we can talk about it all we want, but it's really just you guys getting in there and doing it and figuring it out yourselves as well, because you can go in there with a plan and it's going to change instantly, so just be flexible as well. And you're at their mercy too, especially at the school. So
I think in a lot of ways it's much harder at the university level sometimes, but it's also a lot easier, right? So pushing an act of Congress is definitely harder than getting a school to adopt a policy or take away a policy. So, but at the same time, as Jeremy was saying, like, they don't necessarily have to listen to you because they're not, you're not their constituents. You're just a student population. But I think some really good things to keep in mind when you're working at the campus level is that you have to identify for the administrators why you're a good representation of the community on campus, and what's your significance, more or less. Why are you good for the campus community? It's because you're pushing for public health and sensible policies that keep students safer and not dying, things like this. I think that's definitely a great way to push it. Public health is definitely something that all universities care about and they're often scrutinized for. So that's a great way to get in the door. If you are trying to change a policy on campus, figure out who your policy changing body is. At some university, it's all dependent upon your university. That's the thing. It's not the same equation like you're going to meet with an elected official. Your university might be very small, might be very large. Either way, there's going to be a body that changes that law, that policy at the campus. So on some campuses, it's the student government. So all you have to do is get a student senator to introduce a bill into the student senate, and then they pass it forward or whatever, and then they sign it, and it can sometimes go into effect. Other schools like VCU, we have what's called the Board of Visitors, who they take care of things like the student drug and alcohol policy, and they're a strange, mysterious board of people who get together in dark rooms, and nobody really knows who they are, kind of thing. It's really hard to get a hold of them. But the way that you can get in front of them is by speaking directly to the administrators. So we did a lot of work meeting with the dean, the vice provost, things like this, getting in front of them with several chapter members, talking to them about what we are, what we do, why we care about this stuff, why they should care about it. It's lobbying in that sense. It also helps if you've been on campus for a while and you have, existed and they've seen what you're doing. Oh, you're not just some random group that started up last semester. Unfortunately, that's some of the stereotype we go against because of the transient nature of college groups. They come in and out real fast sometimes. If you've been around, especially like University of Maryland, I think you're going 8 years or something there. So as being a chapter there, you can really say, we've had X amount of students go through. We are a large, influence in this campus, and this is why we care about this. Connecting them to that. And then, also you have the benefit of, it makes it a little easier too in this sense because you have the benefit to cause uproar. It's much easier to start a revolution on campus than it is to start a revolution in the streets all across the country to change a federal law. So if you can get enough students, even by show of a petition, something simple, oftentimes if you can't get a bill introduced by a senator because they just don't want to talk to you because they don't want to touch drug policy because they're trying to become president or something, you can get involved by collecting signatures by tabling on campus, and you get enough student petition signatures that get to a certain percentage of the population, just like you're doing a ballot initiative, they're going to have to listen to you eventually, and if they don't, you go to the media, and then all you have to say then is they're not listening to student concerns. We have 14% of the student population, 10,000 students, whatever, want to see this law change. So you have that opportunity too, is that they don't want uproar, they don't want a media scandal, they don't want to look like idiots in front of everyone. They want to make sure everyone's happy, especially the parents, because they're paying lots of money, and that's really the whole thing. It's the educational complex there and all the money. So if you can prove that you're trying to improve safety, you're trying to make the campus a better place, and that you're a significant influence, and you get in those meetings, like Jeremy said, just getting in there and figuring out what it's going to take. I know if you were here for the harm reduction panel, you may have heard Kristen talking about how I was literally at her door, once a month, every month, banging on her door, trying to talk to her about starting a drug education program at VCU because we didn't have one, and the only time you could get it is if you were arrested. And I was like, I have this great idea. We're gonna call it Party Smarty. And she's like, nope, keep coming back. I did that every day or every month rather for like a year. She said, I think it's probably about right. And then finally she's like, okay, we'll talk about harm reduction education. And then we ended up working it out. It became Just Say No, KNOW, and now it's a club on campus. Just got the best new student organization on campus, and they have funding, and they're doing all those great things on the state level now too, and spread to other campuses. And it's all about that. If you can get involved with even just one administrator, she did so much to legitimize our cause on campus. So think about that if you can get involved with anybody. There's just so many different ways, but I encourage you to just do what Jeremy said and get out there and try it and figure it out. Great question, though.
Any other questions, comments, concerns,
Queries.
queries? Yeah, right.
How about you go about refuting false testimony or the dissemination of false information?
So, give me an example of like what you mean. Like
you said about the police going and testifying in front of the courthouse, and then he's clearly saying that what they're saying is wrong. It's false information they're relying for. How would you go about doing that or raising the flag so people are aware that, look, all of that's bullshit?
Mm-hmm. So this is actually something that as drug policy reformers we deal a lot with. Who here has heard of Kevin Sabet? Yeah? Okay, so if you don't know who he is, he was formerly an advisor to the National Office of Drug Control Policy, Drug Czar's office. He's a very large spoken out there in the media, in the public, prohibitionist. He's not for drug policy reform in the sense that we are, and he is often actually debating SSDP in public, and he's also behind Project SAM, which stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and they're for changing the policies but not legalizing. Who knows? But anyway, he's out there oftentimes. This is something we deal with. He actually goes out there and he does a lot of testifying. He does a lot of producing false facts sometimes, or kind of taking a study and making it say what he wants it to say. But he does a lot with marijuana. It's his big thing right now. He teamed up with Patrick Kennedy, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, to start this SAM, and they've been going all around the country and working in media, and huge media reach, and getting all of these oftentimes age-old arguments of things like gateway theory, things like this that don't have any scientific fact. And the best way to do it is to hit them back the same way in the media and advertising, that kind of thing. Who here heard about what happened with the Marijuana Policy Project during the Super Bowl. Does anyone know what happened there? Yeah, you probably saw the billboards. They Project Sam was out there refuting what they were saying by putting out false information. And what did Marijuana Policy Project do? They bought a billboard on the way to the Super Bowl and made a competing billboard advertisement that said the exact opposite, that marijuana was safer, and that and they made fun of Project Sam on there, and it got all over the media, and everyone found out, oh, Project Sam, who the hell are they? What are they talking about? Oh, it might be false. Completely, hitting them where it hurts, and right there. Also, Americans for Safe Access did a great article that got pretty widely shared. One of their doctors on staff, Dr. Sunil, I believe his name is, he wrote an article for, I think, it was a major online publication, but it was the 11 myths that Kevin Sabet perpetuates, kind of thing. And he went through line by line. He said this, quote unquote. Here's why he's wrong. He said this. This is why he's wrong. And it got shared and all over social media. And next thing you know, they took the article and they handed it out at a hearing where he testified in front of the Senate about this stuff. So everyone that walked in, Asa was there, and they hand out this article. Here's what you're going to hear him say, and here's all the exact scientific facts. It was written by their doctor, who was a doctor of medicine, whereas Kevin Sabet was a doctor of sociology, I think, maybe. So he's a doctor, but he's not a medical doctor. So it was doing like that, getting an actual official and that kind of thing. Very creative ways. One thing, think creatively about this. If you can go into a hearing and hand out information before they get a chance to say it, you're gonna get there. So.
Another super easy way to do it, and much less resource intensive, is obviously we all probably don't have the funds to just buy a billboard. But as a movement, hell yeah. There's have you guys heard of the Marijuana Policy Project, MPP? So they it's just mpp.org. They've got some really great resources. They've got a lot of talking points specifically aimed at the common arguments against marijuana legalization, like teen use and legalization, drunk driving and legalization, and all these other common arguments that people bring up. So if you just want to go on MPP's website and look at their resources and kind of print those out and just have them on hand, that would be good to add to your arsenal.
I'd also like to point out that MPP's resources are on point. They're using CDC facts. They're using government facts. So just definitely check them out.
Add one thing not to do though. When I was there, every now and then people are passionate on both sides about this. And there was one young man, and when somebody would testify, one of the police officers, or they had some prosecutors testify, he would shout out from the back of the courtroom. And they gave him a couple of warnings, but finally he started just outright. He couldn't hold it in, and he was just standing up shouting out, and they had to escort him out. Well, it makes him look. They don't take him seriously. But then everybody that was there with him, a lot of them they already have that mindset anyways. So a lot of them right there with him were thinking, okay, they're all, look what they're doing now. They're all like this. So don't do that. Now the way, when I had touched on it earlier, when they were saying things, I wouldn't. The only one that was an outright lie, but the guy was wrong, was the chief of the Annapolis City Police. And some of you may have saw this in the paper when he said they were bringing bodies out in body bags. Well, look, some senator just destroyed him on that before. And he didn't come to. I was at the House hearing. He didn't even show up. It just took the whole Annapolis Police Department right out of it. So, but there was other things that you could tell they were just saying. The big one was the DWI thing, and me being a former state trooper, and I wasn't in uniform long, only about 3 years. Most of my career was all undercover, but I did my share of drunk driving, and they were saying that they don't. One of their big arguments against legalization, the one that's the police anyways kept hammering on, was the pretext stop. Look how much other stuff we get from marijuana arrests, and the DWI one. Those were the two. If you took those two out of it, there's nothing else really they had to say. Those two they kept hammering on. And the state police, my department, who I know very well, they said that we don't want this to be legalized because we don't have a method by which to test the levels of somebody in their bloodstream yet. So therefore, we don't have the infrastructure. Don't build it. Don't make this law without us having time to do the infrastructure. Now, I was lucky in that we only had about 3 minutes to testify, but the guy who was in charge of that committee, he didn't want to hear what we had to say anyways, and he stepped out. Now, I don't think he ever came back. The guy who put the bill in, he took over. So I knew him. So, when my 3 minutes came, I just kept on going, and every point by point, whatever they were saying, I was trying to counter. And, where it's not like this weed just grew yesterday, is what I said. It's not like we just one day woke up and there's marijuana. Why don't, if either it's a huge problem, and there's tons of marijuana now, and people are driving around Ohio marijuana wrecking cars. If that was the case, you guys would have a test. There is no test because it just ain't happening that much. And but there was other things like that too. But so yeah, don't. There's always one guy. Just try to control that one guy. If he's with you, if you're that one guy, control yourself. But if you're with that one guy, it's like when you go out and everybody's having a good time, and there's that one guy. Try not to be that one guy. And just be respectful when they, I didn't want to argue back and forth. A lot of these guys I knew. There's a lot of behind the scenes arguments. I may not lobby much with legislators, but in the police world, where I'm well known, it is a huge debate. You ought to look at my Facebook. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I've been called a hippie. I've never been called a hippie. I'm 50 years old. I've never been called a hippie in my whole life, man. But it's an intense debate. But I just tried not to go at those guys. I might have went at their position. I might have said, respectfully, Chief so-and-so, I worked with him, and he's very respected, and I compliment him. But I have to disagree with him. I would disagree with his position, rather. I wasn't disagreeing with him.
I think something we should be noting is it's important that if you disagree with their opinion, not to dismiss it outright and to try and be knowledgeable of the other side.
Definitely.
Because if you can provide both sides and then advocate for your own position, then that makes you look more informed.
And keep an open mind. I wouldn't be here if I didn't keep an open mind. I mean, I was a narc. I was the hated of the hated. I was not just a police officer. I was a narc. That's a whole subspecies of police. So if I didn't keep an open mind and start looking at some of this stuff and start looking at what we were really doing, and I'll talk about that more in the closing when I talk about my career. But if I didn't start looking at that, then maybe I'd be with we wouldn't be having this conversation now. I wouldn't be meeting any fine people. But yeah, keep an open mind. Listen to their point. Most people aren't always wrong. There's a little something in there, and that may be, they may have something.
Alex, do you have
you got medical amnesty passed in Georgia, right?
Yes, sir.
That's why did you seize on any momentum from another movement?
Oh yeah, we totally. Basically, what we did is we took North Carolina's bill, and North Carolina being a fellow Southern state, we capitalized off of that, and we also use experts like Robert Childs to come testify in hearings in our state. And I would encourage you guys to contact Robert if you do have any hearings like that. He's pretty good about those kind of things. But yeah. Robert Childs. If you guys do get serious with your state's medical, just contact Drew, and Drew knows him really well. And then get it official before you do start contacting him, though.
I wanted to go back to the DWI issue really quick because that's a huge contentious media.
That's the big one,
issue right
yeah.
now. And I feel working with the movement for a long time, I feel pretty confident arguing basically any drug policy argument that's thrown at me, but I don't feel confident with that one. I don't really know how to talk about that issue.
Well, first of all, I don't need a drug test to know if you shouldn't be driving a car as a police officer. If I stop you and I don't need to know whatever they talk about, the nanograms or whatever in your bloodstream. I don't need to know all that. If I open the door and you fall out of the car and you can hardly speak and your eyes are glazy or whatever, and I give you a breath test and there's no alcohol, well, there's a medical emergency or you're on something. And I did it back in the 80s. We didn't have I can recall, arrested a guy for driving under the influence of heroin. He nodded off and drifted right into the shoulder. I didn't need a blood test to check his blood test for what heroin was. He's not safe to drive a car. I don't think there's anybody in here, and I'm for legalization of all drugs. I don't think there's anybody in here wants legalization of all drugs and we can just go buck wild, drive around our cars with it. I don't think there's anybody who wants that. You know, we want people to be responsible.
I mean, alcohol is legal, but we still
Exactly, and you can make it. You can make an alcohol arrest. What if you refuse a blood test or a breathalyzer? I let you go. You know, yeah, no, that's not what happens.
So maybe what we should be advocating for as a movement is testing impairment rather than substances.
Well, marijuana's tough too because it stays in your system. It stays in those fatty cells for so long, and that's what they don't get. You know, they're like, well, you know, this guy he tested 20 days later. Well, you're not high 20 days later. You know, I guess it'd be great for some of you if you were, but you're not. But you're not. You know, so 20 days later, you may have it in your system, but you're not. You're no longer high. You're no longer impaired. You know. So it is a sticking point with them, and they're hard-headed on it. That and the pretext stop. They had a guy testify of all the dynamite things he's done, and he is a number one in probably the nation interdiction, and he's a good friend of mine. But all the different times he stopped carloads, 800, 900 pounds of cocaine. One time he got 2 bodies out of a trunk of a car. Nobody even knew they were dead. He got it because it always starts with, I got a marijuana arrest. So when it came my turn to testify, I said, to the legislators, I said, I got an easy answer. Let's outlaw air fresheners. Then you could search every single car you want to. And man, we could come up with all kinds of stuff. We could come up with Jimmy Hoffa probably in somebody's car. We could find anything. Just outlaw air fresheners. But those 2 things, you're right. The DWI one and the pretext in the police world, my world, those are the big ones. Those are the ones I'm arguing all the time with guys.
I kind of see the marijuana, too, say in Colorado, as a way to supplement income for these agencies as well. 5 micrograms or whatever it is, now they're not getting the marijuana bust. They can arrest people for that. And there was also, I think, a deal made with them, too, to kind of get the bill through there was the testing for drivers. But that's a personal opinion, I guess.
In Washington, Colorado, their law remained the same, and this is a good way to do it. It's currently illegal to drive under the influence of drugs. It will remain illegal to drive under the influence of drugs. Nothing is changing there. It's a common argument that we'll see, especially if you start to get lobbying. Well, what if somebody gets high and doesn't take care of their kids? Well, that's neglect, and there's already a law for that.
That's exactly right.
What if somebody plays video games and doesn't feed their kids for 6 days? Like, that's potential. It happens. WoW is addictive. There's already laws for that. It's neglect, and it's gonna catch them no matter what they're doing and neglect their children. Or to if they're gonna get into an accident, that's illegal. So keep that in mind. That's often an argument that will get thrown at you, and it'll try and derail you. But there are already oftentimes multiple laws that will catch them if something were to go wrong.
And a police standpoint is always, the legalize the drugs. If somebody breaks into your shed, we're still locking them up. I mean, you have people in drugs that are going to be stealing, they're going to be robbing. Okay, we're still going to lock you up for robbing and stealing. We're not packing up and going home. There's going to be some of us still out there doing a few little things here and there. Trying to survive in the post-prohibition world.
Oftentimes the worst part is the robbing and stealing will get them, maybe a few months in jail, and then the very small amount of crack powder will get them 10 years in jail. So, I mean, you have that kind of thing where violent crime often isn't being as processed as nonviolent crime. So.
I was hoping this is not straying from topic too much, but as far as conversation and with congressmen and lobbyists, policymakers, is there any conversation about employment drug tests? And as far as changing policy around that, is there even the beginning of the discussion? I feel like that's much later on, but is anyone even talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. People are talking about it, but the fact of the matter is that even in Colorado, if you work for a private employer can define their own terms. They can say, you have to pass a marijuana test to work in my business, and that's their prerogative. I mean, that's something that, probably 5-10 years down the road, that's going to be a major issue of ours, making sure that people aren't discriminated against because of their drug use. But for right now, I mean, it's a non-issue, in my opinion.
This is a federal town, too. But, I work background investigations down for federal clearances. You can't have in any of your systems. So that's the federal government. This is Maryland, Virginia, D.C. For you, those of you who are local, this is the federal government is everything here. So they already can't have it.
Maybe we can point to the studies showing that once those kind of policies are enacted, productivity goes down because people
people's mental health goes down, they can't unwind when they go home because they got to worry about but maybe we could push more towards along the lines with the impaired driving, that impairment-based tests would be more suited, especially in safety-sensitive positions. And something that's like an app you could put on your iPhone, and have that, in 15 minutes, out of these. Maybe we could add that to our message and try to change things.
Yeah, I think for now, the strongest thing that you can say about that is that, it's up to the employer, and we're not going to have a world where everybody's going to work high. I mean, that's the easiest way to say it right now.
If people want to go to work high, they can already.
Yeah, exactly.
If somebody really wants to, how many people have gone to work hungover? Maybe still drunk from the night before. That's totally legal, right? What's up with that? If you're a machine worker in a factory and you're kind of hungover, like, what's to say that you don't nod off? You don't have to be on heroin to nod off. Be tired. If you're a driver, how many truck drivers drive tired? These types of things. I think it's important to realize that we should absolutely be advocating for people being safe in the workforce. Like, we don't want anyone going to work high and potentially hurting someone or getting hurt, that kind of a thing. But it's important to remember that when you're not on the job, I think it's personally a personal privacy issue, right? When I'm at work, I'm at work. But if I'm at home, I'm at home. And if I want to drink a beer or have a cup of coffee or eat some chocolate or what other drugs I might intoxicate myself with, I should be able to do that. And as long as it doesn't affect my job, that should be okay, I think. And also just the basis from which drug tests aren't really that effective, because you could use crack cocaine and be clean in a couple of days if they want to randomly drug test you. You could use opiates or opioids. But if you smoke marijuana, as George said, you can stay in there for 40 days sometimes, especially if you're a regular marijuana smoker. So is that really getting to the root of the problem? Like, if they smoked marijuana 40 days ago on a weekend and they come into work on a Wednesday, a month later, and it's still in their system, are they really hurting anybody? Is there, I think that it also, as far as Drew is saying, as far as making sure we're not being stigmatized against, oppressed against, and in that aspect, people should be judged on the content of their character and not the content of their urine. I think that's something that we should all really advocate for. Peeing for enjoyment, not for employment. That kind of thing.
I think if you're just an investor and you hear about a company doing that, then it's a bad sign on the management that they're not capable enough to identify these problem workers, that they would have to go to that. So, we can't make them put these policies in place, but maybe we can choose not to support those kind of foolish.
It's a good point, because one of the legislators brought up that exact thing when I was not when I was testifying, when Ms. Love was testifying, and he's a small business owner, but he has a bunch of employees, and he said, I'm not so sure if this is legalized, that I'll be able to get rid of them if I don't want them smoking pot working in my, So it is an issue. There are people thinking about it, legislators.
At my previous employment, we had a problem with it. They were doing this random testing, and so a lot of people left this place of employment. And we asked him why they're doing it. Well, he had a story that said I was looking for a database admin in '95, and they went through 7 candidates before they found one who wouldn't come up positive. And so you're choosing the 7th best candidate.
Right. Yeah.
You're right. Look at the FBI, talking about federal government. They had to recently, FBI, CIA had to both recently change their drug policy when it came to candidates for hire, and when the last time they used an illicit drug was. I think it used to be something like you couldn't have used marijuana or any other illicit drug in the last 5 years, and they had to change that to the last year because they were realizing that there was almost nobody that had not tried something.
Urban police departments changed that a long time ago. Like Baltimore City Police, did you get high this morning? No. All right, come on in. Come on.
We got time for about 1 or 2 more questions.
Yes, sir.
For Jeremy specifically,
Uh-huh.
off the top of your head, 5 buzzwords ever used in the Southern Bible Belt state.
In the Southern Bible Belt state, definitely no profanity. I wouldn't. I would refer to marijuana as cannabis, medical. We've been told not to talk decriminalization and legalization with our legislators by our people as well, just because they see our stepping stones, which is, it is what it is. But we're not trying to frighten them. I'd always be polite. one thing I always say is I ask them to consider the legislation and ask them to take the time to look at it. And I tell them that it's really important to me, my organization, and my fellow students. What not to say, definitely don't be rude, don't be loud, don't be obnoxious, don't be, like I said, profane. Does anybody else have anything?
Probably you might want to throw in Jesus somehow.
Sometimes, I guess, don't play off the Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we were with Sharon, we were turning out to be lobbyists, she said, don't you say it's the first step towards, this is not the first step. Because they don't want you to start thinking, oh, it's the first step towards legalization. So just don't say that it's the first step.
Because it scares the shit out of them. Just talk like you would to your parents' friends, or what I'm saying, to somebody reputable in your community. Same demeanor. It's really important to be confident, and it's really even more important to remember that these people work for you. You know what I'm saying? They work for you. So.
Actually, we've been told specifically by a lot of people helping us on campuses, do not go in with the "they work for you" attitude.
I went in with it, but I didn't go in with the attitude. I went in with the mentality that I was right. I wasn't an asshole in any sort of way. I was extremely polite, but I went in there with the mentality that their job is dependent on me and my friends, and I actually tried to paint that picture for them. We coalition build, and at some points we're getting emails out to 12,000 people, with call list. So we run the hell out of their phones. Their offices were flooded with emails, and we had people from various different groups going to each and every single committee hearing and showing a presence. So, you want to make them feel comfortable that if they vote for something that is taboo, because drugs are taboo in our society, and they probably always will be, you have to make them comfortable that in 2 to 6 years that they're not going to lose their job because they voted for something like that. So it's our job to educate and then build the resources throughout the community and the constituents' votes and to demonstrate those votes. So, the coalition building is extremely important. We got the ACLU on board. We got NAACP on board. We got the Prosecutors Association on board. We went anywhere that we could find to find organizations that would be helpful to us. So, I don't know.
And actually, just kind of building off the two of you here, Drew's comment about Jesus and Jeremy's coalition building. One of the things that LEAP was actually very successful in doing, and Neil Franklin, was going out to churches and speaking to churches about drug policy reform and why it is an issue that they should care about. And he was successful in bringing them on to I-502 and Amendment 64 in a lot of cases in Colorado and Washington. So that's something to take into consideration, especially if you're in the South. I think that's definitely a community that has a lot of weight and a lot of respect. And getting them involved and making them understand this is an intersecting issue. This is something that affects everyone. And if you ask a couple questions, you can probably figure out the root of where it's affecting them. So just as many people as you can get involved. There's a lot of different organizations out there. There's a lot of different causes. If you can bring other movements into ours, and the way that works is working with them to get things done too. And it's I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. You're just kind of reiterating the respect and not going in there with mentality, but not with the attitude. Mm-hmm. That's a really big difference there. Yes, they are there to work for you, but they can easily close the door and not listen to a thing you have to say, or just tune you out and look at the wall for 7 minutes while you're in their room. You know what I mean? So go in there with the attitude that you want their help, and you're going to help them. However it's going to be. It's X for Y. It's an equation. Unfortunately, it's not just a bunch of altruism.
And when you're talking to these people, it's important to get if you utilize as much media as possible, whether it's social networks or newspapers. We've got newspaper articles here. We went in every city in Georgia and we had stuff out there. We had parents and people talking about it. So just there's a lot of ways to go about it.
What's the way to show them that it's okay to evolve on this issue and that allows them to save face?
Get people to support that particular piece of legislation and voice that support. Whether it's going there, writing, calling, everything, emailing, Facebooking. paper articles, if you can show that they're supporting their constituency for what you're doing, they're more likely to be receptive of it, even if they weren't in the first place. If they see a majority of their people want this, even though they disagree it for some sort of moral or religious reason or conservative values, the public opinion will, that's where they get their power. So.
Absolutely, and we see this happen. Governor Hickenlooper from Colorado, he was not really for legalization of marijuana, but he respected the voting initiative. He respected the people of Colorado. We're seeing this now in Maryland, I think, with decriminalization. The governor's going to sign the decriminalization bill, but he doesn't necessarily agree with it. So it's something to keep in mind, that you don't have to agree with something if you have a majority. Is anyone here familiar with Marijuana Majority organization? Yeah. So if you haven't, check out Marijuana Majority. You'd be amazed you could bring on your side there with some of their tools and activism stuff. But we are the majority. Marijuana reform, we're at a tipping point, right? We're past it. We've gotten to the point now where marijuana, at least in that vein of drug policy reform, marijuana is accepted. Marijuana reform is accepted. We've got higher rates than we ever have for wanting to legalize and decriminalize and have medical is up in the 78th percentile, I think. So I mean, we're far beyond the majority on medical marijuana. But it's a lot of times they don't have to be on your side. They just have to have enough people pushing them. So if you can get enough voices together and get your voice heard, then it'll work.
The other panel's running a little bit longer, so we have time for another question. We don't have to push it if you guys are all one more. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to comment on that last part too. Another way to show hesitant lawmakers that this is working is that I read something recently about how the rates of marijuana use in Colorado have not gone up since legalization, but approval has. Just over time, people have become more accepting of the law change, and even people who aren't personally using it are more okay with the law.
But they will. I read the site in Vancouver, the heroin injections insight with Dr. Gabor Mate. The Vancouver police was all over against that when it started. Well, now they're expanding. The Vancouver police are one of the biggest supporters. So perceptions change.
A lot of people are surprised when the sky doesn't fall.
Yeah, exactly.
They really believed it was going to happen. There's a funny article that came out just recently about Colorado, and look at Colorado now that marijuana's been legalized. It's just a picture of the exact same town. And it's true. It's very much that nothing has really changed. There are already people using drugs. It's just about bringing it out of the shadows and into the light, making it legitimate, taxing and regulating it, making it more safe, keeping it out of kids' hands. These types of things. It's a much more rational position than a lot of people will give it credit.
We get a round of applause for our panelists. Alright, so here's what's going to happen now. I'm presenting our excellent panelists with some gifts from the ECU chapter. Mr. Jeremy? Yeah. Okay. So at this point, we're going to go out to the Rams horn front, the group picture. So we're going to get the other group out there. If I can get help from one person to help me carry the banner out there outside the floor, that'd be really cool.
Also, just two things real quick. Resource-wise, if you guys want follow-up information regarding lobbying, no matter who you're lobbying with, two things: the student organizing manual, but made by SSDP, and the lobbying guide, both of which are available at ssdp.org/resources.
ACLU's got a good one too.
Oh yeah.
That's really good. Did you see the article that Nancy put out, or Brian put out?
No.
Well, the headline is SSDP wants you to support the Sample Project. Whatever.
Come on, Jeremy. That doesn't look like you, man.
It's something that, at the very least, staff needs to decide and at the most important situation. It's on the NSA blog, and